Welcome to the Paradigm 2020 Annual General Meeting. In the interest of shareholder well-being in this COVID-19 environment, there is no physical meeting today. Rather, it is to be a virtual meeting convened online using the Lumai technology platform. My name is Andrew Gaffney, and I'll be the facilitator for this virtual shareholder meeting. Details of the use of the Lumai technology platform were included in the Paradigm 2020 Notice of Meeting. It allows shareholders, proxies and guests to attend the meeting virtually while ensuring social distancing. I have been advised that based on the proxies already lodged and attendance is registered online, there is a quorum of shareholders present for this meeting today. It's now just after 11 a.m. and the meeting therefore has opened. Next slide, please. In attendance today, we have Paul Rennie, Executive Chair. Paul is experiencing the first day of lockdown in Adelaide, and we wish everyone the best in South Australia. John Gaffney, Non-Executive Director. Dr. Donna Skerritt, Executive Director. Kevin Hollingsworth, Company Secretary, and Jason Crowell, as representative of RSM Accountants, the company's auditors. All attendees can watch a live broadcast of this meeting. In addition, shareholders and proxies have the ability to ask questions and submit votes. As this is Paradigm's first virtual shareholder meeting, there are a few housekeeping matters that I'd want to raise with shareholders on how to ask questions and how to vote at this meeting. Next slide, please. As the meeting has opened, shareholder questions on the resolutions can now be submitted. To ask a question, simply press on the speech bubble icon. This will open a new screen before you. At the bottom of that screen, there is a section for you to type your question. Once you've finished typing the question, please hit the arrow symbol to send. Please note that you can submit relevant questions from now on any of the proposed resolutions detailed in the Notice of Meeting. And then, before putting each resolution to a vote today, the company will respond to any relevant shareholder questions on that particular resolution. In terms of meeting efficiency, for this virtual meeting, and to give all shareholders the opportunity to ask a question on any of the resolutions, questions may be moderated, or if we receive multiple questions on a topic, those questions may be amalgamated together. Finally, due to time constraints, we may run out of time to answer all of your questions. If this happens, we'll answer them in due course via email or by posting responses later. Next slide, please. Voting today on all of the resolutions of this meeting will be conducted by way of a poll. In order to provide shareholders with sufficient time to vote, you can cast your vote on each resolution from the commencement of this meeting until the close of this meeting. If you are eligible to vote at this meeting, a new polling icon will appear on your screen. Selecting this icon will bring up a list of the resolutions and present you with voting options. To cast your vote, simply select one of the options. Please note, there is no need to hit submit or enter button, as your vote is automatically recorded. You do have the ability to change your vote at any time up until the close of the meeting. Before each resolution is put to the meeting, the results from proxies received on the relevant resolution will also appear on your screen. As mentioned, voting on all the resolutions will remain open until the close of the meeting. Following conclusion of the meeting today, the company's independent share registrar, Computershare, will tally the votes lodged, and the results will then be published as soon as possible on the ASX platform. For the meeting today, we'll start with Paul's chairman's address and then his business update. We'll take questions on Paul's business update and then move on to the formal business of the meeting, being the resolutions outlined in the 2020 Notice of Meeting. During Paul's business update, shareholders can post questions, and at the end of Paul's address, we'll take a short break and then allow Paul to respond to the questions received. I also want to make mention that that following the closure of the formal business of this meeting, the board will also make itself available for general questions, and I'll let you know when that session commences. Having got all the housekeeping out of the way, I'll turn the mic over to Paul now to enable Paul to provide the Chairman's address. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I would like to take the opportunity to address all participants on today's video conference call of the Paradigm AGM. I think everyone would agree that this year, 2020, has been like no other year. Despite the global COVID-19 pandemic, your company has continued to progress with its global registration plans. Personally, I'm very grateful to my fellow directors, the entire management team, and all employees and consultants and CROs as we continue to progress our company's plans during the pandemic. I'd like to make a special mention to all of the Melbourne-based Paradigm staff who have remained very focused and worked very hard during their 6-month lockdown. We know that produced significant challenges to them, but I can say that they all attended the regular update and project management, risk management meetings that we have each week and attended without any absentees. So I would very much like to thank them for their focus and hard work during lockdown. I'd also like to acknowledge the US-based Paradigm staff, as they've also had to battle with the pandemic, and in many cases they have personal experience with the COVID-19 infection. I would like to say to all shareholders that your company is entering into a very exciting phase as we wait for feedback from the US FDA re our clinical development program. That's via the Type C meeting. I'd also, my apologies, earlier this year, Paradigm received very positive feedback from the EMA. As we have reached the phase 3 stage of the clinical development, it is also exciting to see your company turn its attention to registration and commercialization of xylitol. I'd also like to acknowledge the support of the company's strategic partners. There are far too many to mention, but I'm thinking of strategic partners such as Bene Pharmachem, Siegfried Pharma, Bell Potter, and also Baker Young Stockbrokers, but many others, somewhere in the region of 100 other strategic partners that we have. To shareholders, I know that investing in times such as COVID is a difficult and often very problematic situation, but I would like to thank all of those shareholders who've held their Paradigm stock during this time. I would also like to say to shareholders that the Paradigm board and all staff are working tirelessly to bring xylitol to market. Our daily focus is on opening an IND and commencing our phase 3 clinical trials and moving to global registration as quickly as we can. Thank you, Andrew. I'll hand the mic back to you.
Thanks, Paul. We haven't got any questions in relation to the Chairman's address, so I'd now like to ask Paul to present the CEO report, the business update report, which is probably the main reason why all shareholders have today tuned into the meeting. So Paul, back to you, please, in relation to the business update.
Thanks
Next
again,
slide,
Andrew.
please.
Thank you. So just for shareholders, let me outline what I'm going to cover. First of all, there will be what I consider some housekeeping slides in relation to disclaimer, etc. But then the presentation is going to focus very much on our lead indication of osteoarthritis with a brief update on our orphan indication MPS. I'm hoping that shareholders will take away 4 key messages from the first one is the pharmaceutical treatment for osteoarthritis is a huge and massive market opportunity. It represents a blockbuster opportunity, and blockbuster drugs generally are north of several $1 billion per annum in sales. Paradigm is pursuing a global registration strategy. Third message would be the uniqueness of the multimodal PPS in treating osteoarthritis. And that's going to be a very key understanding for all shareholders to take home why this particular drug of pentazan polysulfate has such a significant opportunity in the treatment of this chronic disease. And I'd also like to have a take-home message, which is we're going to introduce a R&D concept day, which is planned late December. And during that meeting, we will update the market on the outcome of the FDA Type C meeting response, Paradigm's clinical pipeline and studies, and also R&D activities, so you know what is coming down the pipeline. As Andrew said, post the formal part of the meeting, which is the AGM business, we'll have approximately 30 minutes of questions and answers. If you enter your questions on the Lumi platform, they will be captured by that platform, and the company will endeavour to answer your questions if they're not answered as part of the Q&A session of this meeting. Next slide, please. As you know, as an ASX 300 company, we need to highlight that we will be making forward-looking statements, and the appropriate disclaimer applies. Next slide, please. I hope most shareholders understand that Paradigm is a late-stage drug development company, but moving our focus onto commercialization. By late-stage drug development company, I'd like to highlight that this time next calendar year, so next November, December 2021, Paradigm should be well and truly into its phase 3 clinical trial with another confirmatory study, a second phase 3 study to start shortly thereafter. So we are really at the final stage of clinical development. Our mission is to develop and commercialise pentazan polysulfate for the treatment of joint pain, whether it be driven by injury, inflammation, ageing, degenerative disease, infection, or genetic predisposition. Next slide, please. So here is our corporate snapshot. Some things to note would be, obviously, in the period of February to March, we saw the very significant correction which applied across the market, which was the understanding of the COVID-19 pandemic. But since that time, we have continued, as I mentioned, through very dedicated staff, worked diligently to continue to develop our milestones and our plans. We've seen a nice recovery, and I still think that the share price has some very significant upside because, as I mentioned, we are now entering into the final stages of clinical development. We also list our top shareholders there, and I think it's very interesting to see that we now have a number of the very large institutional investors on our register. Also, underneath the graph of the share price, you can see that we are now starting to expand our shareholder base. Once that was 100% Australian, we're now seeing very significant expansion of our shareholders into Asia, North America, and also Europe, which is very pleasing to see. Next slide, please. The osteoarthritis market. As I mentioned, 4 key take-home messages here. Osteoarthritis is a massive market opportunity. Next slide, please. So this is not an official forecast, but this gives all the shareholders an idea of the size of the market. We're not saying that we will achieve a $15 billion sales revenue at peak sales, but it does show very clearly that on the left-hand side, looking at those markets of US, Canada, the EU5 and Australia, approximately 72 million plus people clinically diagnosed with osteoarthritis. We know from peer-reviewed papers that surveys have indicated that roughly 81% of osteoarthritis sufferers are dissatisfied with their current treatments. So they don't provide sufficient pain relief or joint mobility relief. So we're saying that of those 81% of OA sufferers, if we were to just look at a small percentage of those, let's say 10%, very conservative number, and we were to achieve a price of $2,500 per course of xylitol per year, and not factoring any redosing during that 12 months or thereafter. So just 10% of the market moving across to xylitol as first-line treatment, you can see that that would equate to around about US $15 billion plus per annum. And I know that sounds like an extraordinary number. However, we do know that other treatments, such as the treatments for rheumatoid arthritis, which is a much smaller market than osteoarthritis, such as Humira, is the largest selling pharmaceutical worldwide with annual sales of over $20 billion. So it's not inconceivable to think that a treatment for osteoarthritis where you have a large number of people dissatisfied with current treatments at a price of $2,500 per annum would not generate a very significant blockbuster market opportunity. Next slide, please. So the second take-home message I want to stress is that we, Paradigm, are focusing on harmonised global registration. So when we talk about doing the clinical trials, we're not talking about getting registration just in the United States. We're talking about getting registration in the United States and also Europe and also in Australia. So our plan is to work across what we call a global registration plan. And just to take shareholders through what we've been doing in the last 12 months, in February 2020, this year, we had a face-to-face meeting with the US FDA where we presented our pre-IND plans. We got some very valuable feedback from the US FDA, and if shareholders are not familiar with these types of meetings with the agency, I'd just like to explain the process. And the process is the agency requires the sponsor to provide all of the available information about the product, which includes the manufacturing of the product, the standards used, etc., in producing the product. Also, all the previous clinical history that goes with the product, the phase 2B clinical trial we did, plus any additional clinical data. And then what are the plans going forward with the phase 3 clinical study? And the sponsor then points to those outcomes and asks the agency specific questions to guide the sponsor in the appropriate phase 3 clinical trial design. During that meeting with the US FDA, the Bene Pharmachem product was clearly identified as being a product that is well characterized and well accepted by the US FDA. And they made it very clear that unless the other products of pentasan polysulfate were identical to Bene, there would be significant issues with the registration of those products. I'll talk a little bit more about the Bene product a bit later, but it was very, very clear that the agency has a very clear position on the Bene Pharmachem product. We also sought to bridge to a number of previous studies, and the agency provided us with very valuable feedback. In terms of the additional preclinical studies, this refers to a number of clinical studies that we submitted, which were historical studies undertaken by Bene Pharmachem back in the 1960s. And the agency said that these preclinical and toxicology studies should be done to GLP standards. And GLP standards did not arrive on the global scene until the 1970s, the late 1970s. Therefore, by definition, our preclinical and toxicology studies were not to GLP standard, and we asked the agency if that would be acceptable. They advised us that probably come IND and registration, it would be important for those preclinical studies to be done to GLP. So after our meeting with the US FDA, we sat down with our consulting toxicologist and we set out a plan, and this year we have repeated all of the preclinical and tox studies that were in the BENE program, and I'm very pleased to say that those studies have almost been fully completed and are being written up. So come time for our submission to the IND, we can say to the agency that we heard their comments about this particular matter, we've taken it on board, and we have now provided all of the studies according to GLP standards. Those studies have been undertaken in various preclinical centres throughout North America and Canada. They've all been done to GLP standards. Western PK. So the pharmacokinetic study that Paradigm submitted to the FDA was a pharmacokinetic study using Japanese nationals. And we asked the agency if that PK study on Japanese subjects would meet the requirements for registration. The agency responded that it's unlikely that one PK study with the Asian population would be sufficient, and we should look at doing a Western PK study. There are some very technical reasons why there may be differences from one ethnicity to another. Our consulting clinical pharmacologist didn't think that they applied. However, to be safe, we have reproduced that Western PK. We've reproduced the PK study in the Western population, and that study was done at CMAX in Adelaide, and that study has now been completed. We have understood so far that there are no surprises or anything that is unusual, and the PK data from the Western population is similar to the data from the Japanese population. And the agency also advised us that Paradigm needed to undertake 2 adequately sized phase 3 trials, which is relatively standard for the agency, but we felt that given the information that we had, we may be able to apply for a single phase 3, but they told us that we needed to plan for 2 phase 3 trials. So our clinical team took that on board, and they have developed a protocol which has now largely been approved by Europe. And what it allows us to do is almost run the 2 trials, that's the first phase 3 and the confirmatory phase 3, at very similar times. So it won't have any real impact on the timing. These are not required to, at the moment, to be run sequentially. These are run concurrently. So we start the phase 3 trial, and then we do our confirmatory phase 3 trial at a similar time, and probably we'll start the phase 3 trial in the United States, and we will do the confirmatory study with subjects from Australia and also Europe. So bringing all that together, we will be able to go to the agency and say that we have repeated the preclinical and toxicology studies to GLP standards. We do have a Western PK study, and we will have data from 2 adequately phase 3 clinical trials. So with all of that feedback, we have put that into a briefing book and applied to the FDA for a Type C meeting. So during that Type C meeting, again, the sponsor outlines everything that we've done, including the updated data, and we say to the agency, is there anything else that you would require before we open an IND or before we are able to achieve registration? So we're looking further out than just the phase 3 trial. We're also asking the agency to consider what we have in terms of our data set. Are there any impediments once we've passed, or assuming we pass the phase 3 trial, that would prohibit us from registration? And we're building those studies into the program now rather than wait till the end of the phase 3 trial. But we can talk more about that on our R&D day when we get there. The IND is going to be harmonised with a clinical trial design for multiple regions. So that includes Europe and Australia. The Type C meeting feedback will ensure Paradigm's trial will meet all the necessary components for registration should the phase 3 clinical trials be successful. And I think this is a major message for investors. It's not just completing phase 3 trials that opens up the enormous financial returns from a product. It's registration that opens up the financial opportunity. And I think we've seen that with some examples of companies in Australia who've gone off and done phase 3 trials, gone back to the agency, and the agency has asked them to repeat certain aspects of the trial, or to repeat a trial, or to generate more data, because they didn't get a clear understanding from the agency before they commenced their studies as to what to do, and have made assumptions along the way, which the agency has then later rebutted those arguments. In Europe, we had I'm moving to the right-hand side of the screen now. In Europe, we had a meeting with the EMA. We agreed the clinical trial design and the endpoints. We confirmed a non-active placebo, so we're not doing a study to an active comparator arm. The rationale there is that pentazan polysulfate sodium is or has a first-in-class mechanism of action, and therefore is not able to be compared accurately with other drugs on the market that just address symptomatic aspects of the disease. So the agency agreed with our data, and they said that the appropriate control would be a non-active injection such as saline. So we do now have the ability to recruit patients from Europe, and we have a very clear path to product registration in Europe. And that was an amazing and fantastic outcome for the company. And hats off again to all of the clinical and regulatory staff involved in both of those submissions to the Europe and to the FDA. In Australia, we continue to pursue the provisional approval with the TGA. The TGA has also asked Paradigm for some additional information, which we'll outline on our R&D day. But essentially, we are waiting on feedback from the FDA Type C meeting before we make our final submission to the TGA for provisional approval. Now, if you follow the provisional approval process closely, you'll know that there are two main stages. The first stage is to meet with the TGA and establish that the drug that is being considered does have some potential advantages over existing therapies, but secondly, that there is a significant unmet medical need. And we have had that approved through the TGA, and our next meeting with the TGA is a go, no-go decision from the TGA. And they've asked some questions which we believe will be answered by the FDA, and we therefore want to wait for the FDA Type C meeting response before we make our final submission to the TGA. To do so without the FDA feedback could mean that we get a no decision from the TGA, and that is it. We have to then go through the full registration process in Australia. So it's very important that we just take our time to make sure that we answer all of the aspects of the TGA before we make our final submission. Another interesting development has been our plans to work on a pay-for-use special access program. Currently, our special access program is on hold as we wait for new batches of the drug to be available. And once it is available, we will consider rolling out a pay-for-use special access program. This gives us the opportunity to test the demand at a certain price point. So we would like to go down that path. It will generate some revenues for the company, but it's not seen as a supplement for provisional approval or approval in the other major markets. This is just simply as we go to test the demand for a particular price. The provisional approval for the TGA does remain a major goal for the company. I just need to reinforce that. But also the second take-home message is please understand that we are talking about a global registration plan. We're not talking just with the United States and then we go to Europe and we go to other markets. We are talking about having a plan that allows us to be able to conduct these phase 3 trials in multiple jurisdictions at the same time, and therefore conclude that we can get multiple registrations in multiple jurisdictions with this program. Next slide, please. So now I'm moving on to the topic about the uniqueness of the PPS product. And you may ask, why would Paradigm have such confidence in the phase 3 clinical study? So what we've seen to date, just to remind everyone, that we have had a successful phase 2B osteoarthritis clinical trial. It was double-blinded, placebo-controlled, multi-centre study of 112 subjects. We met the primary endpoint, which was the mean change in KOOS pain from baseline. The secondary endpoints were PGIC, or Patient Global Impression of Change, and they were highly significant, indicating that the subjects receiving the drug felt there was a fundamental change and improvement to their clinical status. We also saw 46.2% of patients who received xylitol reported a greater than 50% reduction in pain at day 53, which means that the 46.2% of patients in the active group were reporting a clinically meaningful outcome, which is also very important. And we confirmed the safety profile of the drug in the target population, and it has been a very valuable study to inform our phase 3 clinical trial design. Now, I know Dr. Skerritt and her team, her clinical team in the United States, have been all over these data, and she has worked tirelessly to go through endless tables of data and calculate the time of peak response, and also the drug effect size of the drug in these patients with osteoarthritis. So we have a very good idea of when the drug is most effective and the timing of that, and we also know that there is a more than adequate drug effect size to be able to guide us with our phase 3 clinical trial design, and our protocol reflects all of the knowledge that we received from that phase 2 trial. And again, bear in mind all of that data from the phase 2B clinical trial, the whole clinical study report was made available to the agency so they can review all of the outcomes and also all of the statistics from that particular study. Also, we've seen a very consistent result with patients treated in Australia under the Special Access Scheme. It's not a clinical trial, we need to state that, but it is real-world evidence where doctors who believe that patients have failed all available therapies for their osteoarthritis can apply to the TGA and treat their patients with xylitol. And what we have seen when we originally started the SAS program, we were using the same pain scoring tool of KOOS as we used in our phase 2 trial. And we were seeing that greater than 50% mean reduction in pain across 205 patients. And more recently, we switched the pain scoring tool to WOMAC, which is what we will use in our phase 3 clinical study. And we've seen, again, on a number of different cohorts of patients as they've come, the results have been sent back to Paradigm. Again, a very consistent result of 47.3, close to 50% mean pain reduction across 76 patients. We've tried to, in our announcements, make that clear by saying that there is literature around some what have been very good products. We're not being critical of other companies' products. We're just stating that there are peer-reviewed papers around saying that non-steroidal anti-inflammatories do have an on average reduction in pain from baseline using the WOMAC pain scoring tool of around 30% reduction. And also we know from other peer-reviewed papers that there is around about a 30% reduction in pain scores when patients are treated with opioids. So we're just trying to give our shareholders some perspective in terms of what we're talking about here. We also executed a expanded access program, which was from the United States with up to 10 ex-NFL players. We had to open an IND to get the program up and running. So we have got experience with submissions to the US FDA. That was approved. We did execute during the COVID restrictions the 10 ex-NFL players who reported on average a 65% reduction in WOMAC pain from baseline. And the feedback from our colleagues in the United States is that all of the participants continue to do very well post that study, which concluded around July this year. Next slide, please. Now, this is a key take-home message. Again, we're not trying to discount the efforts of other pharmaceutical companies. We're just trying to state what is in the public domain about some other compounds that have been tested in the field of osteoarthritis, and highlight one very important point, which I think is critical for shareholders to understand why they should have confidence in the Paradigm plan. Now, in the middle of the screen, you'll see mechanism of action. So all of the compounds and targets above the green line are what is known as monospecific targets. These are where pharmaceutical companies believe that there's a particular molecule that could be driving the disease. And if you block that molecule, you can then stop the disease. And so that is a monospecific target. And what we have seen from these monospecific targets, such as the first example, an Adams TS5 inhibitor, which was Adams TS5, as most people know, is an enzyme that breaks down the supporting matrix of cartilage. Once that the osteoarthritis disease progresses, that Adams TS5 enzyme is increased, and therefore the company has thought, well, if we can block Adams TS5, we can stop cartilage breakdown. So recently the company published their results from a phase 2 trial, and they reported that there was no significant difference with placebo on their preservation of cartilage, and that particular compound had no impact whatsoever over the clinical outcomes of pain and joint function. So having a single target, and this is from a lot of the work that our Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Krishnan, talks about, is a monospecific target in a complex multifactorial disease is highly unlikely to be able to control the disease. And what's really required is a multimodal acting pharmaceutical product. And I'm pleased to say that pentazan polysulfate is such a multimodal pharmaceutical product. We know from work that has been done and published in the public domain that PPS has activity against Adams TS5, but it also down-regulates the expression of nerve growth factor. These are all key targets that are mentioned above here. It also reduces joint inflammation, so we know it's anti-inflammatory, anti-IL-6, anti-IL-1, anti-TNF, and we also know it improves the circulation to the subchondral bone, which reduces the bone marrow lesions. So that gives us great confidence, and this is why we say that we believe that Pentazan is a first-in-class multimodal active compound. It's acting on the disease at many different stages of the disease, and working together, the drug is able to produce not only improvements in clinical symptoms, but also positive signs for the health of the joint, such as reduction in cartilage breakdown, removal of bone marrow lesions, reduction in the inflammation in the synovium and fluid within the synovial joint. Quite a number of the clinical outcomes that you're looking for to say that the disease is progressing. And we know from people who've been through the Special Access Program, they do say that the swelling in their joints has gone down. They do know that their joints are much more flexible than previously, function much better, much greater reduction in pain. And again, the clinical group have done a lot of work in looking at the breakdown of the pain scores at different points throughout the pain scoring system, such as pain on walking, pain up and down stairs, etc. So that's a key take-home message. Pentazan polysulfate is a complex molecule comprised of subunits, and each of those subunits has a role in various aspects of disease, of the disease process. So it's not a single target, it is a multimodal pharmaceutical product. And that, for a disease like osteoarthritis, gives us great confidence going forward. But it also means for other chronic diseases that have inflammation and other tissue remodeling going on, Pentazan has the potential to act in those diseases as well, which will be explained in our R&D day. Next slide, please. So given the fact that we know that this multimodal activity of Pentazan polysulfate is very important, and we know that Bene Pharmachem is the only approved manufacturer of PPS recognised by the US FDA, we felt it critical for our shareholders to secure the supply of Bene PPS. And so after the FDA meeting, we had long and extensive discussions and negotiations with Bene for them to understand that we need to bring some real benefits to our shareholders by updating our current agreement with them. And so those changes that were made was, first of all, to the term of the agreement. So we now have a 25-year exclusive term from Bene Pharma from the date of registration of the product. So that's a very, very significant outcome. And we also included updates in terms of the territories that Paradigm can operate in. And we believe that's a major benefit for shareholders to understand. And Bene Pharma Company is the only manufacturer of what is recognised as Pentazan polysulfate. And I know people can go on the internet and see that there's a company in China that makes Pentazan polysulfate. I can tell you that that is not identical to the Bene product. If it's not identical, then that company has not the ability to leverage off the work that Paradigm and Bene have done. They have to go back and go through a whole new drug discovery pathway. So please understand that there are no generic manufacturers of Bene PPS in the world. Bene is still the exclusive manufacturer of their product, which is recognised by the US FDA. Despite that exclusivity agreement, Paradigm continues to prosecute new patents around the use of Pentazan polysulfate, and in particular Pentazan polysulfate. And you'll see on our timelines that this year we have filed 3 new patents around the use of Pentazan polysulfate for treating respiratory disease and acute respiratory disease, but also around the use of pentazan for treating pain. And also important to note is that when a sponsor brings a drug that has already been on the market, such as under the 505(b)(2) pathway, the regulatory agency provides 3 years of exclusivity, therefore prohibiting other like molecules to come onto the market and not be approved for the same indication. For orphan indications, that regulatory exclusivity period extends out to 7 years. So that's why we're very focused on our MPS program and also our osteoarthritis program. We have these layers of protection that will make it very difficult once Paradigm gets through to registration for a generic or an alternative product of this type to come to market. Next slide, please. A brief update on the mucopolysaccharidosis MPS. So as a lot of shareholders will know, that Paradigm is investigating the use of pentazan polysulfate sodium for MPS, and we're seeking to establish whether pentazan polysulfate sodium may be an effective combination therapy with the current enzyme replacement therapy, which is one of the 2 common forms of treatment for patients with the MPS disease. So during this last 12 months, Paradigm has confirmed, and we've made announcements around the fact that both the United States FDA and the EMA have agreed and provided Paradigm with orphan designations for MPS 1 and MPS 6. We also had parallel scientific advice meeting, which includes the EMA and the US FDA, and talking about our plans, and both the US and European agencies provided clarification in what they're looking for a clinical trial design and clarity around the regulatory pathway forward. And recently we announced that we have initiated a phase 2 clinical trial for MPS 1 with the first patient dosed at the Women's and Children's Hospital in Adelaide. So that's a very exciting step forward for the MPS program. It does represent a really solid partnering opportunity once we start to get data around the use with in combination with enzyme replacement therapy, that we would be able to partner with one of the enzyme replacement therapy manufacturers such as Biomarin or Genzyme, and they could then bolt on the PPS treatment on top of their MPS enzyme replacement therapy products. So this is really designed to be getting the product to a certain point in terms of its clinical effect and understood, and then we can go and partner this particular program. Next slide, please. So preparation for commercialization. I know time is running out, so I have to whip through these last few slides fairly quickly. So just for shareholders to understand that your company and the management have been working on gathering and consolidating feedback from the US FDA, EU EMA and AU TGA. And the aim is to have a pivotal protocol acceptable to all major jurisdictions. And the benefit for shareholders is that once the phase 3 trials are finished, we can move on to registration because the pathway is clearly identified, and it will also open up the sales for the product globally or in the major pharmaceutical markets pretty much at the same time, rather than going from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So it is a very comprehensive plan, one that I know Dr. Skerritt and her team have worked tirelessly on, as well as Michelle Coffey with her regulatory team. And you know, it's a wonderful example of how we can bring all of these ideas together and present them to the EMA, and they've accepted it. We're hoping that in December the FDA will accept our plans and we can move on and get into the phase 3 trials. We have assembled a very high caliber and experienced globally focused team in the US and Australia. So we have a number of people who've worked with big pharma companies working and consulting to us. We have appointed in Australia our commercial lead, that's Beverly Huttman, who is ex-CSL, and she's been appointed to ensure we have the data ready for global pricing and reimbursement. Beverly's also undertaking patient research and understanding the needs of people with osteoarthritis, also exploring the pharmaceutical administration and delivery programs and improving patient convenience, such as a auto-injector or smart injector. We've also spent a lot of time seeking clarification from the US FDA and EMA about additional information required for the product label and registration of the product. So we're not just focusing on phase 3, we're looking beyond phase 3 and trying to design a comprehensive package that will allow us to move through to registration without having to come back and do further data for the agency. So we're taking all of the feedback from the Europe and FDA very seriously and making sure that we have our programs compliant. We continue to develop further preclinical and clinical data to define the mechanism of action for treating arthritic disease states and also additional indications. And Beverly and her team are also looking to prepare a comprehensive due diligence pack for any of the partnering discussions that are likely to arise as we enter into phase 3 territory. Next slide, please. So this is the Paradigm key events in 2020, and I hope shareholders can see that we have continued down the path of developing additional forms of protection through patents. We've filed 3 new patents, one in pain, one in respiratory, and a second one in pain. So 3 new patents. We also continue to write up and submit for peer review clinical data. So in October, the manuscript for the Ross River virus project was written up and has been submitted for peer review. The phase 2B osteoarthritis manuscript has been written up and that has been submitted for peer review. We have submitted the briefing book to the FDA for a Type C meeting and so on. Very significant achievements throughout the year, and as I say, again, hats off to all of the Paradigm staff who've really worked tirelessly during this pandemic to continue the fantastic development of xylosol for the phase 3 stage and beyond. Next slide, please. In terms of key appointments, the other point I'd like to make is in terms of Paradigm, we are growing up as a company very quickly. We were a few years ago just 3 people. In recent times, we've made some very significant additions to our team. So I won't go through all of the names there, but you can see that we have expanded into a wide range of positions, and all the people are very high caliber, hardworking, very dedicated people to the Paradigm story. We also have quite a number of strategic partners. These are companies that are very important to our continued success, supplying the active ingredient, Bene Pharma, Chem, Siegfried, manufacturing our final product. Then we have the CROs who are going to be in charge of rolling out our phase 3 clinical trials across the United States and Europe. We have quite a number of CROs that we're working with our regulatory submission documents, etc. So a really comprehensive team, and this is not all of the staff that we have on board, but this is a sample of how Paradigm has moved on from a 3-person company onto now a very serious pharmaceutical business. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the 4th take-home message is around the introducing of a new concept. So as we grow up as a big pharma company like other big pharma companies like CSL, Paradigm is holding a R&D day, which will be tentatively booked in for the 21st to 22nd of December. will be a video conference. It will feature presentations from Dr. Skerritt and her team, and also Dr. Ravi Krishnan and his team. We'll be covering off matters such as the feedback from the Type C meeting. We'll have details on the osteoarthritis and MPS clinical trial design and timelines, and we'll also have an update on our scientific research pipeline. This will give investors another opportunity to see the development plans in place and the level of detail that we have gone into in preparing these plans, and meet some of the management staff as well. So we're all looking forward to sharing those outcomes with you in the very near future. Of course, it is a program that will be run with the ability for shareholders to ask questions at any time during that process. Next slide, please. So I think this is my final slide for the outlook for the remainder of financial year 2021. As I mentioned, we're going to have our feedback from the Type C meeting with the US FDA in our R&D Day. Second, we will be hosting the R&D Day detailing all the clinical programs necessary for registration and what we're planning to undertake in terms of research and development. We will have another 30-odd data points from TGA SAS patients who are reported under WOMAC pain scoring system. We hope that we will have commenced our first phase 3 clinical trial, and we will have some peer-reviewed publications out in the marketplace, which I think will be very useful. As far as MPS, we will be on our R&D Day outlining our MPS clinical trial program update. We're looking to work with collaborators in Brazil, where there's a very large number of MPS 6 subjects, over 200 in Brazil, which would be a fantastic subject for us to access for our trials. And we'll continue to have further updates on patient recruitment of MPS 1 patients via the clinical trial at the Adelaide Women and Children's Hospital. So in terms of additional news flow, we will have peer-reviewed publication on viral arthritis clinical trial program. Now, the interesting thing with the viral arthritis, I think, is that it shows very similar characteristics to the osteoarthritis disease, in that you see a very significant upregulation in many of the inflammatory cytokines, cartilage destruction, and other aspects of the osteoarthritis disease. And so in a very small patient population, it was a phase 2A pilot study, there were really striking clinical outcomes, and that's what will be published. We will also have data presented from the research program investigating the safety and efficacy of PPS in a viral-induced respiratory disease model. That will be an animal model, the first step towards taking that to the clinic. We will have further announcements around our ongoing collaboration with Bene Pharma Chem, some exciting developments there. And Paradigm is very pleased and very proud to be able to say that we have some very significant international presentations coming up in December and also January. In December, we've been invited to the Evercore Biotech Day. Evercore is one of the very big biotech specialist funds in the United States, based out of New York, and we have been invited to attend that presentation day. And also we're very fortunate to also have been invited to present to the main JP Morgan conference in January this year. So some very big and exciting developments for Paradigm. I think next slide, please.